Hey there, Galaxy fans. Switch to Sprint and get both an unlimited plan and the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus included for just $35 per month per line for 5 lines. All you need is approved credit and an 18-month lease. No trade-in required. Visit a Sprint store, sprint.com, or call 800-SPRINT-1. S10 Plus 128 gigabytes after $26.67 per month credit. Apply within 2 bills. If canceled early, remaining balance due. Unlimited basic after $131.21. Pay $32 per month per line with autopay. Coverage and offer not available everywhere. Excludes taxes, fees, and roaming. Speed maximums use. Rules $30 activation fee and restrictions apply.
At Jewelers Mutual, we're a little obsessed with jewelry. Obsessed like auctioneers with talking fast.
50, we're going to 50.
Pop stars with auto-tune.
Yeah.
And dentists with asking questions.
So, how did he propose?
After they've put their hands in your mouth.
Great.
Yes, we've made jewelry our obsession for over 100 years. We love it so much we named our kids Ruby, Amber, and Opal.
Venti soy latte for Opal?
At Jewelers Mutual, we insure jewelry and only jewelry, which is why people who are also obsessed with jewelry trust us with theirs.
This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we embark into a new decade, 2020. Probably entering in a decade in a way that I don't think anybody anticipated for us to be headed in towards. I guess in some respects, they usually say for something to grow, something may have to pass or something may have to die off. And clearly, the biggest talk affecting the NBA right now is the passing of David Stern, former NBA commissioner. And we will definitely give our perspective and thoughts about that somewhere during the course of our show. But, clearly all eyes are focused on this part of the
future of TV will be disruptive, outside the box.
Sorry, I just think the future of TV would just combine your favorite things like live TV, on-demand titles, and access to Netflix and HBO in one place with a voice remote that lets you find everything easily. I mean, that's what AT&T did.
Who are you?
Introducing AT&T TV. Call 1-866-ATT-SAVE to learn more. Available in select areas. Requires high-speed internet. Recommend minimum 8 megabits per second per stream for optimal viewing. Limit 3 concurrent AT&T streams. Netflix and HBO subscriptions required. Restrictions apply.
NBA season now where things really kick into high gear. NBA All-Star Weekend, trade deadline. What are the outcomes with some of the teams that we've been looking at so far past the first quarter of the season? A lot of stuff to get into, but specifically one team that I know we're going to definitely be scratching our heads and digging into, man. And I can't wait for us to get right into it. Let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet. www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC. My man, Mr. Warren Shaw, ripping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Happy New Year, Mr. Shaw. And much like our conversations and perspective percolating, how are things down there in South Florida?
As always, man, I appreciate you asking, but salute to you and all the fans listeners of NBA Baseline, as you alluded to, embarking on a new decade. Happy New Year to everybody who listens to our show and our podcast and has been supporting us over the years. And yeah, man, definitely shouts, and RIP to David Stern, as you alluded to. We will get to that a little bit later on in the show, but excited to get this thing going, man. First official show of the new year, in terms of our recording. So we have a lot to get into as always.
Definitely. So as much as the attention will be on that docuseries that will be rolled out about Michael Jordan, I think people in Philadelphia are more concerned about the state of affairs that is taking place in the city of brotherly love with the Philadelphia 76ers. And so that will be where our focus and attention will be, squarely on in this show. And it's listen, it's definitely warranted. So I can't wait for us to kind of dig into that. What do we make of this team? What exactly are the expectations for this team? As we move towards the end of the season, and whether or not this team is truly all the hype that everyone had talked about, as far as how this team was put together in the off season. So this is definitely going to be a great topic of conversation to be had, and I cannot wait for us to be able to get into that. And then we'll also be talking about players who went MIA in the off season, who we had expectations to be picked up at some point before the season started. And even that, as we get into the beginning of 2020, there's been no indications of whether or not these guys will find a home to lay their hat in we're going to talk about some of those guys. And, you know, it's amazing because some of these players that we are going to talk about, there is no reason why we should not be watching them playing either on TNT, TBS, NBA TV, ESPN, what have you. These guys should have a home, and we're going to try and figure out why that is not the case. So good way for us to end off 2019, and definitely where our focus and attention will be going into 2020. We're going to try and help some of these teams help themselves. Once again, we appreciate you and yours for tuning into the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at Game Famously. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Those things never change and hasn't for years. And so we expect and always appreciate you and yours hopping on board with us, sharing your thoughts and comments. Be sure to get at us at our handles and definitely weigh in as we continue to bring up those great topics that you love to hear. As always, if you don't have the Baseline NBA podcast and you're a first-time listener, whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts, look for the Baseline NBA podcast, add us to your playlist, kick back, relax, and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. You know how we do, you know how we roll. Let's talk Sixers here on The Breakdown. Time to break it down. Time now for The Breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And our topic for The Breakdown is the team that coined in the city out of brotherly love. Is it that they really need love, or do they need therapy? I don't know what to call of this team, but if you are the Philadelphia 76ers, if you are a fan of the Philadelphia 76ers, and you have a lineup of Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, Josh Richardson, Tobias Harris, Al Horford, as part of your roster, your starting five, it's really hard to imagine why you'd be the third best team in your division and the fifth best team in your conference, especially given that you had made it to the Eastern Conference semifinals just a year ago. But this is where we are. And the frightening reality is, no matter what you do from the head coach up to this basketball team, it somehow won't mitigate the mediocrity of what we've been seeing from the Philadelphia 76ers. And as we enter into 2020 with the expectations of this basketball team, Shaw, I feel bad for a lot of people who I really feel like are trying to ask, and let me not be disrespectful, but it's going to come off disrespectful, little boys striving to be grown men in a grown man's game. And it sucks because when you look at this roster, this team really should be a better basketball team than what they've represented as we're recording this podcast.
I believe this is a team that should be dominating, within the Eastern Conference, should be maybe a game or two behind the Milwaukee Bucks in the East. Like, literally, those are the expectations that they came in with. And while some may think, oh, that's crazy, especially looking at their record currently right now, this is a team that has not been able to scratch the surface of their potential. And that said, I think they are absolutely the worst good team in the NBA right now. And I feel like that is probably scary in some ways too, because they have so much more to go. They struggle with their identity, especially offensively. Defensively, they are, they're pretty good right there. Well, their overall defensive rating, and they know how to get stops. They have rangy guys, lengthy guys, and even some switchability with guys like Horford and Tobias Harris, and obviously Simmons as well. But offensively, they just have no real identity. Simmons wants to play one way, and Embiid needs to play another way. And Brown hasn't been able to figure out a way to get those two guys on the same page and for it to make it work. And it's not just them. I mean, it's the guys like Harris and it's the guys like Richardson and all that. They need to be able to contribute too. Bench scoring is also a problem for them. They're really, right now, as we're recording, in the midst of a 4-game losing streak. They're really missing their rookie Matisse Thybulle, who all intents and purposes has been great. When we were doing our stat show a couple of weeks ago, finding him, second, third in 3-point shooting was ridiculous. We were very surprised, and he's been out, and that's really helped them. Hurt them offensively and defensively because he was a 3-and-D guy. But overall, I think this points to Brown and what he hasn't been able to do offensively to get this team to be consistent and be on the right page all season long.
So it's difficult because I agree with a lot of the things that you're saying, and maybe in some respects, Shaw, it points back to Brett Brown. not being able to get these guys to be better fluently offensively. But and listen, I don't know, when I think about teams that have championship caliber, one, I think about how this team fares not just defensively, but I also think about what they're getting offensively from this team. And listen, all 5 of their players, right, are in double figures in scoring. You would think, like, if you tried to do a side-by-side comparison of the Milwaukee Bucks and you said to yourself, wow, how is Budenholzer getting all 5 guys to be scoring in double figures, their starting 5, and have the kind of record that they have? And then you look at a team like the Philadelphia 76ers who are equally doing the same thing and yet struggle the way that they do. I agree with you in one thing that you said. Joel Embiid wants to play one way. Ben Simmons wants to play another way. Tobias Harris only knows how to play a certain way. Josh Richardson doesn't know how to play anyway, right? Unless someone truly guides him. And Al Horford, who was that, remember, you were saying in the offseason show how Al Horford is such a key component. He would be such a big blow, to the Celtics losing a guy like Al Horford on their roster and then going over to the Philadelphia 76ers, and he should help kind of shore up a lot of the things that maybe Brett Brown can't seem to. And even he isn't able to get these guys to play fluently through what I think Brett Brown was hoping to get from bringing a guy like Al Horford onto this roster. It just amazes me when I look at this team because the numbers seem to mask a lot of what is glaringly reminiscent of a team that still does not either believe in themselves or believe in the purpose of what got them to this point. And I think as long as that continues to hang over their heads, no coach, no executive, nobody from ownership is going to put them in a space where they can get out of their own way of upsetting a lot of people's hopes and desires that they're going to be a championship caliber basketball team. Because right now, even they themselves, they say it, they want to believe it. They've been in the playoffs enough times for them to act like they want to do it, but nothing about the way that they execute on a night in, night out basis tells me that they're ready to take that next step. And I think that is going to be the biggest problem because these type of issues linger on and on and on, where not even analytics and numbers is going to help kind of make it clearer for them to make that decision decisive, like right then and there. It's going to wind up being, it's going to take another disappointing exit in the playoffs, or it's going to wind up being a losing streak that sends them from being maybe a 3-4 seed to maybe a 6 or 7 seed before that really hits them hard about this might not be the group of guys ready to make that push.
So one of the things that stands out to me with this team specifically is when you think about Ben Simmons and who he is. So you have to follow me on this kind of, magnanimous journey that I'm about to discuss. You can't really run pick and roll with Simmons and Embiid because you sag off, you're going to dare Simmons to shoot. But right now, Simmons scores like 80-something% of his points per game within 3 feet, right? So take that for what that is. You have Joel Embiid averaging 23.6 points per game. So, very good. Down almost 5 points per game from last year where he was like 27, 28. So he's definitely not, and he's not getting maybe enough touches. But with those two guys, you would figure that they would have to be way up there. Now, granted, Simmons is not a volume scorer, but you figure they have to be way up there in points per game, points in the paint. And they're 12th. It's not bad, but, with those being your two key guys, especially with Simmons only basically shooting things within 3 feet of the rim, I'm surprised Philadelphia is not a team that's 5th or something like that in points in the paint per game right now, at something like 50 plus points in the paint. They just don't find a way to get that done. And because they cannot run that Simmons and Embiid pick and roll, you're forced now to do other tweaks. And, you run Harris, you run Josh Richardson with Embiid. And I think in the last game that they played before we recorded, they actually used Simmons as a screener in pick and roll instead of as a ball handler. And he actually blew up against Houston, and scored, over 25 points. But I don't know if that's a wrinkle that Brown will continue to use, but the fact that you can't put your two best guys in the most basic set offensively on a regular basis is a huge problem for what they do, in addition to the fact that they don't have a lot of guys that want to take the three. They shoot a decent percentage from the three-point line, but they're in the bottom third in terms of attempts and makes, in general. But the percentage is actually pretty good. And that's why you hear them talking about guys like Marcus Morris and whoever else to try to bring some three-point shooting to this roster to space the floor a little bit for Simmons and Embiid as well.
Well, and another thing that I tend to have noticed as well too, and I think to your point, Shaw, the game that you're pertaining to was the game this past Friday against the Rockets, where the Houston Rockets are a very quirky basketball team for you to be able to watch the tendencies of a team like the Philadelphia 76ers and assess a lot of where the issues are, because they at times they in many respects kind of mirror exactly what the Philadelphia 76ers are, but they do it well, right? Like they just do things better, and they really in essence have better players. You could make the argument that if the Philadelphia 76ers believed holistically in the idea that they have dominant players at certain positions, that there needs to be more emphasis to have those guys go out and dominate instead of pairing up certain players. And to your point, they can't do the pick and roll with Simmons and Embiid together. But, something like that I noticed a lot of, especially in that game against the Philadelphia 76ers. I do not see enough of other players doing enough for Joel Embiid to free himself up, establish himself, because they are so dependent on this perception that they have to run the pick and roll.
So I'll say this, I think at some point people are going to start to wonder whether or not you need to stagger their minutes, maybe even a little bit more than they are currently right now. But it's crazy that you don't just consistently try to have your two best players on the floor at the same time, but they don't necessarily fit together for whatever reason. And I don't think that they can't grow into it, but all the expectations are this is a team that's supposed to be here right now. And honestly, I don't want to preach doom and gloom on our show. They could very much grow into it. This is a team that habitually starts off slow in the regular season. And then, around this time, mid to late January, they start to pick things up. And then they usually finish strong. And then you're thinking about them, okay, they may be able to do something in the Eastern Conference. And we may get to that same point. But what you're saying right now, especially when it comes to the offense, that is the biggest issue and the biggest problem they have. Simmons is an elite playmaker at this stage. Still, I'd like to see his turnovers come down a little bit, but over 8 assists a game right now, and the Philadelphia 76ers are third in assists,
but 14,
total assists per game.
But to your point, Shaw, 14.9 points per game for a guy like Ben Simmons. Even if Ben Simmons doesn't shoot the basketball, that's something that Rajon Rondo would be doing. Right? Like Rajon Rondo could, when he was with the Boston Celtics, he was giving them like 17, 18 points per game as their premier player, right? When they lost the big three, he was still giving them somewhere close to, that many points per game, along with the assists, along with the rebounding. And if you're the second best player on this team, not to say that Tobias isn't a good shooter, not to say that Josh Richardson isn't a good shooter, but he shouldn't be the third best scorer on this basketball team with his height and his ability. You can't be making him, a smaller version of LeBron James and tell me that as the third best scorer on this basketball team that's acceptable. It isn't.
Well, and I think a lot of that is going to come with his playmaking responsibilities. And I think that's where it boils down to what does Brown and this Sixers organization ultimately want to do. Right now, passing is his best skill, his best asset, and his defense. I won't take that away from him. He's a very good defender and uses his size extremely well. But if he doesn't have the ball in his hands, well, then he can't create. So he's not really a great post-up player, so to speak. I mean, yes, he's playing against smaller guards a lot of the time, so he can just shoot over the top of them or back them down and get to 3 to 5 feet and make layups.
But Shaw, do you think that was or is the mistake that the Philadelphia 76ers are making, or maybe most of these media pundits who continue to criticize Ben Simmons' game is where they're making the mistake? Is that maybe his emphasis shouldn't have been about him shooting the basketball in the offseason. Maybe the emphasis should have been building upon what he should have already been giving you, just wasn't doing enough of last season, which is backing down smaller guards, abusing them, and getting easier buckets to the basket. Mind you, the other thing that stands out as well, too, is that this basketball team does not get to the free throw line nearly as much as you would think they would with the type of players that they have, which I think is glaringly blatant of a team that is not nearly as aggressive in the way that I would expect them to be with the type of roster that they have.
I mean, it's something that I think they're going to continue to look at as we're discussing this team. You're starting to see Simmons play a little bit better throughout the course of the regular season, even score a little bit more. Again, I don't know that he should be at 15 a game. I think you're right. He probably should be more in the 17 to 18 per game range. But when you have that much depth in your starting lineup, especially with Richardson and Harris and guys who, hey, they can score the basketball, especially when they're set up expertly like they are from him himself. But I like the idea and the point of just saying is like, all right, well, you have to play to what his strengths are right now. I mean, LeBron came in the league, did have a jumper. Giannis came in the league and is still developing a jumper at this point right now. But can Simmons be dominant in that way where he can just get downhill? The key thing about those other two guys I just mentioned, for the most part, is that they didn't have legitimate big men on their rosters with them. Even LeBron, when he didn't have a legitimate big man. No one even the stratosphere as Joel Embiid. And the same thing with Giannis. While Brook and Chris Middleton's not a big, obviously, but those guys, Embiid is as elite or if more so than Simmons is. And I think that's what the problem is, because when he's trying to get down there, well, everyone else is complaining, well, why is Embiid shooting too many jumpers? Why is he out there hanging out at the elbow? He needs to get his ass down there and be posterizing people. So if those two guys need to be doing kind of the same things, although they go about it in different ways, but the end result is like they both need to be on the block within 3 to 5 feet, that is an issue for their spacing and their overall ability to make the defenses stretch a little bit. I do have a question, and while I know they're looking at Marcus Morris and whoever else they can get out there from a 3-point shooting aspect, Thibault coming back is going to be huge for them as well too. But I do wonder, what stock do they have in Shayok, in their G League affiliate? And obviously we had him on our podcast as well too. Is he a guy who they can use to maybe help create and maybe shoot some threes as well too? Because the backup point guard situation behind Simmons is pretty trashy. And while Shayok is not a point guard, if you're running Simmons there, maybe you can give him some ball handling responsibilities instead of Trey Burke and Nato and guys like that. And then maybe that's how you stagger the minutes of Simmons and be a little bit, to get another playmaker out there as well. Those are the things that I'd be looking at if I'm Philadelphia. What is your thought process on that, in terms of, their ability to even create outside of Simmons himself?
I mean, I would have already had Mariel Shayok on this roster because I feel like his ball dynamic, I think, is welcomed for a team that's seriously lacking from their bench play, right? The other night I was watching, and no disrespect, to Mike Scott, because I think Mike Scott, he's one of those rare gems. He's always found a way to be an important piece for a team that's trying to make some kind of run, whether it's a run in the playoffs or a run to get to the playoffs. But this year, he's just been awful. He's been relegated to such a degree. I don't know if he's in Brett Brown's doghouse. I have no idea, but his play has not been great. And so it's funny how you've mentioned Matisse Thybulle's name like numerous times, which I think is great. But I think that there should have been, when you add players like Josh Richardson and Al Horford to this roster, I think it does come at the expense of saying we've solidified our starting five, but now what do we do with our bench? They do not have the same bench that they had a couple of years ago. And a lot of that is affected by what the roster looks like, by what Elton Brand basically spent in order to make their roster be what it looks like now. I think if you have guys in your farm system who can give you that dynamic, Shayok reminds me a kind of a smaller version of what the Raptors were getting from Siakam. And I don't know why that's not on your roster from Jump Street, right? Because that dynamic, you need that on that court. You need it at some point through the course of a regular NBA season on a consistent basis. To not have that and have that hanging around back and forth between the G League and such, I think does a disservice to you building up some kind of depth on your rotation once the starters come out. So I agree with you. I think that if you had no confidence in Trey Burke, Raul Neto, you don't use James Ennis as much. There's a lot of players that you're clearly not using. If you got guys that are doing something down in your ranks, you need to be bringing them up here, because at some point you need to start relying on those guys when you run into these type of 4-game, 5-game, 6-game losing streaks that are like really uninviting and unbecoming of a team that you're expecting to make noise for the playoffs. So I agree with you from that perspective. It's not even so much, Shaw, that I believe it's because Shai can give you a better look of shooting from 3. I just think that having an athletic, dynamic player like that not having some kind of impact on your roster, you do a disservice, not just to your starters, but you do a disservice to even the head coach and how he has options in order to bring players in to help change the dynamic when the team runs stagnant offensively.
So I'm going to throw a couple names at you first here, and then I want to get your opinion on what do you think is most pressing for them. I look at a guy like Alec Burks, from Golden State Warriors, probably going to become available maybe via buyout market or maybe a minimal trade. DJ Augustin is going to be available. We'll talk about Darren Collison a little bit as well too. He's looking to come back, into the fold, things of that nature. We've already talked about them having specific interest in Marcus Morris as well publicized by The Athletic and such. What do you think their most glaring need is? We don't think it's defensively at all. We know it's offensively, but do they need more of a front court player who's more of a 3-and-D type guy? Or do they need a point guard or a backup point guard, so to speak, or a perimeter player who can create and also shoot the 3? I think shooting is the one thing we know they need. But what aspect do you think they need to get it from? Would you say it's more in the backcourt or in the front court?
If they're going to continue to play under this offensive system that Brown has established, they're going to need to get their shooting from their backcourt. They're going to need to get something from what they've obviously have lost and haven't been unable to make up for when JJ Redick left this roster. Okay. And it's funny, Shaw, because there's two things that can't be replicated, right? You cannot replicate the impact clearly that Jimmy Butler had on that roster last season, right? That you're expecting Joel Embiid to have stepped up and to have absorbed. So you cannot swing for the fences again if you're Elton Brand trying to bring another player of that type of dynamic. You were fortunate when you made that trade because you did it at the beginning of the season, and you had Butler primarily for most of that season. So when he got embedded, you really got to see as good as it was going to get for that team, whether or not it was good enough to get them, to the Eastern Conference Finals, which obviously that didn't happen. Okay. I think that you leave room for yourself to continue to improve, because you have to hope that Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons take another step at the expense of going through whatever they're going through in the regular season to be the type of players they are. But clearly a lot of that is impacted by the responsibilities that Ben Simmons has as being kind of the point forward. And I think that they're going to need to elevate their backcourt play, something that pairs up better with Josh Richardson. Or, hey, man, if Josh Richardson just isn't getting it done for you in some respects, because I've seen him having to handle the ball at numerous times when they're trying to free up Ben Simmons and his responsibilities, then maybe a DJ Augustin is the better way to go. Because if you go big with a dynamic player at the point guard position, a guy, and I say that by not saying that Darren Collison is that type of player. I say that in his need and what he does bring to the table, I don't know if whether or not that is going to help. Whereas with a guy with DJ Augustin, you've seen what he can give you, and I think it fits and marries perfectly with the Sixers if that's your expectations of where you're trying to build up and be better at in the backcourt set.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. You know, while again I know they're enamored with the front court situation, I do really feel they need more playmaking at that. And while Augustine isn't an elite assist type guy, you know, he can definitely handle the ball, I think, in a better way than Burke and Nato are giving for them right now in those limited minutes that they're getting. I think they're going to be paying attention to see what happens maybe even in Minnesota. You know, Teague and Napier, those guys are not long to be on that roster or maybe for the entire season. So maybe one of those guys shakes loose, whatever. Long stretch, I think they'd love a guy like Goran Dragic if he became available to them, you know, but I can't see Miami making a move that would allow Philadelphia, you know, obviously a rival in the conference this year specifically, where they would make that type of situation. But if Dragic gets traded out to the West or something like that and they buy him out, you know, then he becomes a free agent in some sort of situation like that. I think they'd love a guy like that for their team. But you're right, man. They're missing some of the pieces that guys like McConnell and Redick and things of that nature in that backcourt that they had last year.
Can I make another assessment about this basketball? It's hard for me to imagine I'm trying to make an assessment for a basketball team who I would consider as a rival, considering that I'm a Celtics fan. But, you know, I want to believe that this team is good enough that they should be among one of the finalists in the Eastern Conference that would be coming out of the Eastern Conference. I'm not seeing it, and I don't know if I have the confidence they'll ever say that this will come to be. You know where I've stood about this, Shaw. I've never truly bought into this dynamic of Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. They are representing an era that their drafting is not completely indicative of the evolution that these guys need to take place for us to put them in a space that merits what we're seeing from other guys. I feel like there's a bookmark, right? Like there's a fork in the road here where we're talking about the young superstars, and I think we're going to be fine. I don't know if we're going to necessarily be fine just yet, because there are certain players who, like Ben Simmons, for example, who we've touted and gone through a whole lot of unnecessary drama between their transitions of when they were doing in college and what they're doing now, for me to buy into the idea that we should be elevating them. They represent a space. They represent a face and a space right now where teams like the Philadelphia 76ers are going to be all right, but I don't know if they're going to be, you know, among the elite until these guys get moving. So that's going to be my first point. But my more important point, and I say this with the utmost respect, because we had Al Horford's sister on our podcast last year, and she was a great guest, had great insight, great points. And I know it sucked because, you know, she was doing her thing, and, you know, her brother then decides to say, hey, I'm going to take my talents to Philadelphia. But I really believe in my heart of hearts, man, when I see Al Horford and I see the transitions that's been taking place between Boston and here, if I'm Al Horford, I would really start considering the idea of maybe taking a step back from having to be a starter or needing to be a starter, and really looking to help elevate, if you're going to be all about the Philadelphia 76ers and this opportunity for you to possibly try and make a run for a championship and, you know, get a trophy or whatever, you may have to relegate the idea that you need to help these second units of the teams that you represent. It is not to say that Al Horford is not starting forward capable. It's not to say that his talents have withered to the point that he shouldn't even be starting. What I'm saying is what he brings to the table right now, I don't even think is even helping the Philadelphia 76ers, because a lot of the issues that we see with this team are far beyond what Al Horford has been given other teams when he was with the Hawks or when he's with the Celtics. What he needs to be doing, or what he can be contributing, can really help elevate a lot of the things that we're questioning that this team will encounter once these guys get it together. And I would hate to see him be rendered obsolete on a roster that really is probably one of the most talented rosters he's played with in almost a decade, right? I mean, if you really think about it, the roster that he's playing on is far more talented than the roster that he played on when he was with the Boston Celtics, and that had Kyrie Irving. You know what I'm saying? There's so much upside with this team, but there's still so much more missing. And if he, as a veteran, can't communicate to these guys to play at a level that he has been desperately seeking back in the day when he played next to Joe Johnson and Josh Smith, if he can't even get these guys to play beyond a level like that, if he's just basically getting Josh Smith, Joe Johnson 2.0 versions with Embiid and Simmons. He needs to put himself in a position where he can have the impact on certain things that I really do think can help, kind of mask the other things that are now going to be glaringly apparent with this team in the next couple of years, because Elton Brand has spent so much capital putting this starting roster together. Andre Iguodala had to do it, and he did it and got a championship. And I think that if you are Al Horford, you may have to consider that same type of pathway mentality about where you can best help this basketball team accelerate what they need to do in order to be championship caliber.
With Horford, it's interesting because I just don't know that, as great as he is, I felt a little underwhelmed, with his presence last year in Boston, specifically in terms of his leadership aspect. Not what he does on the floor, but it's just, what is he doing off the court? And I think we wanted to hear more from him as a veteran guy, as a guy who's versatile, and a guy who, he usually takes his arm around guys and he talks to them. I know he's not the rah-rah, in-your-face type leader, but maybe this is what this Philadelphia team needs, and he wasn't able to do that last year in Boston, and he's definitely not doing that now here in Philadelphia thus far. So maybe he does take a step back and come off the bench. We just heard this past week as well too, he's a little bit unhappy. He's not really sure where his shots and things are going to come from. So it hasn't been greener on the other side as he would have liked to. But again, I think we still have a long way to go with this Philadelphia 76ers team, and they can turn some things around, and they may do some tweaks to their lineup. As we were discussing it, I was like, listen, if they go after Morris, and they're able to figure out a package, I think they should be trying to get maybe a Reggie Bullock or Wayne Ellington off of New York hands as well too. Just try to see if you can throw in another shooter, to help space the floor and really give this roster some depth that it really needs, especially on both sides of the basketball. So we'll see, man. But I think that Horford situation is interesting, because I don't know where his ego was at and where Brown would feel comfortable enough to say, hey, we just signed you for, $100 million for the next 3 years. Would you mind coming off the bench? I think he would do it, especially if they could convince him and thinking, hey, he could get a couple more shots out of it against second unit type guys. But that's something that I'll have to wait to see. But a pretty interesting point there by you, bro.
Definitely, man. And we're just going to have to keep our eye out right now. The fifth best team in the Eastern Conference, third best team in the Atlantic Division. Will the Philadelphia 76ers turn things around? I will say this much, though, Shaw. If Elton Brand clearly feels that he's not done wheeling and dealing in order to make this roster better, you'll start to begin to wonder if whether or not he is in over his head about the realization that no matter how he configures this team, this roster, that it still comes down to the heart and center of it, which is the dynamic of Brett Brown, Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid. Can these three guys make the Sixers become what everyone has been hoping to have seen, going as far back to when AI and Larry Brown had that, were the pillars of this basketball team. It's interesting because you would think that with this roster, their path to a championship would be far easier with the way that the Eastern Conference is set up than back in the days when the Sixers did have AI and they had the management that they were dealing with and the head coaches that they had. You know what I'm saying? You almost never thought that the Sixers would ever find themselves playing for an NBA championship, especially with the way the teams were stacked in the Eastern Conference. The Sixers have this window, man. It would be truly disappointing to not see them be a representative for the Eastern Conference for an NBA Finals at some particular point with these type of three guys there, because in their own rights, they do represent the beauty of basketball. But right now, we're just seeing the ugliness of a relationship, which you hope that they turn things around.
Real quick, where do you find them? Where do you see them finishing out this season? Do you think they, finish, as a top 2 or 3 seed, or are they going to stay somewhere between 4 and 5?
I think they finished 4 or 5. I think that right now, the way that the Miami Heat are playing, which as we're recording this podcast, they are going to wind up winning again, which I don't think we saw that coming. When you look at the Toronto Raptors, they to me, the Raptors and the Pacers are going to be the Achilles heel for this Philadelphia 76ers team?
I hear you, brother. You know, my concept on this is I think they're gonna figure some stuff out. Ren is going to continue to tinker, so we'll find out, you know, if he's a genius or if he's a mad scientist, you know, at some point. But just based on history, I think the Sixers team is one that gets better as the season progresses. I really expect Embiid to kick some things into gear here and demand the basketball and start putting up 30 and 15 a night. You know, just to kind of turn some things around. But maybe I'm a hopeless romantic when it comes to the Sixers team. I think they're going to finish as a top 3 seed. I think Boston's playing a little bit over their heads right now. Milwaukee is as good as advertised, but I think they're better than Toronto. I think they're better than Indiana for sure. Especially when they have to integrate Oladipo back into this thing. Like I said, I think Boston is just playing a little bit over their heads. I think they can get to a 2 or potentially more likely a 3 seed, but we'll see, man. So, you know, great segment. I'd love to hear what our fans have to say about this one as well, too. Sixers are a very polarizing team with the personalities of Embiid and Ben Simmons.
Well, listen, Embiid said losing is taking a toll on him. Hey, man, you know what it's like to drive down in Florida, bro. you got to make sure you got exact coins if you're trying to get through nowadays, man. You can't get change anymore. You know what I'm saying? So them guys are going to, like, you know, Embiid's going to have to start ponying up. If he's tired of his team losing, maybe he needs to step up and be the MVP caliber player that I said that he's going to need to be if this team is expected to, you know, reach championship grandeur that they're talking about. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time for The Drop. Callie Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And our topic for The Drop, teams. What are you doing to us, man? These NBA teams, man, they showing no love to some of the guys that we used to like and enjoy seeing just a year ago. Participating, playing in the NBA in some form or capacity. Jamal Crawford, he don't have a place to play. J.R. Smith, a.k.a. J.R. Swish, a.k.a. LeBron giving you that. Why J.R.? Who shot J.R.? Look, O.J. Mayo. I mean, damn, these are like throwback names, right? Ty Lawson. I feel like we're in a time capsule. There's a litany of names here. My man Shaw has compiled on where they at. Greg Monroe. I mean, we were just talking about the team he used to play with the 76ers, right? He used to play for the Raptors. I'm sure if he was still hanging around, he might be hoisting a championship trophy with the Raptors and stuff. He's playing in Germany. It's remarkable, Shaw, like the names of these people that you have listed here. Lance Make 'em Dance Stevenson. He ain't playing in the NBA. He ain't even playing in the G League. He's playing in China. So while they're expanding the international game, the global game for the NBA, does it not hurt us a little bit to not see them displaying their talents on primetime TV playing in the NBA?
One of the things that when thinking about this topic that comes to mind is just, you know, I don't understand what happens sometimes in the NBA. Certain dudes just get ostracized, and you could, I'm sure fans and listeners are going to say, well, some of these guys, they just suck. They're just not good, blah, blah, blah. You know, and then you look at some guys who are in the NBA. What happens when it comes to these guys specifically? Mayo obviously had the drug situation. He could apply to be reinstated and has chosen not to do that or whatever. But when you have these veteran guys, because of the collective bargaining agreement, they're going to be owed a certain amount of money. You know, that certain teams were like, they kind of look at their skill set and say, it's like, all right, well, this guy's, you know, a 7-8 year veteran. Do we really want to have him on here and have to pay them X amount of millions of dollars? Or would we rather have this two-way guy, you know, at least he's full of potential. We don't quite know what we have in him yet. Let's go that route. And I think you're seeing teams choose to go on the safer side and try to use the development route or use that as a crutch in some ways to keep some of these other guys out of the league. Jeremy Lin, you know, also in China. China is like a whole plethora of dudes right now, and they could potentially find their way back. I think the biggest name that everyone is campaigning for is obviously Jamal Crawford, and I really don't understand, you know, as a guy who's historically been a great person within every organization he's been, all his teammates always love him. I don't understand why no team has taken a flyer on him as of yet.
Before you go any further, just right now, give me a team when you look at the 16 teams that would be currently represented, like if the NBA playoffs started today, right? Bucks, Celtics, Heat, Raptors, 76ers, Pacers, Nets, Magic, all 8 that represent the East, Lakers, Nuggets, Rockets, Clippers, Jazz, Mavericks, Thunder. Blazers would represent the West. One team from those 16 that I just named off to you that you would think would no question Jamal Crawford would be helping right now. Who would you see first that he should go to?
The team that can use him the most in terms that has playoff contention right now is probably Orlando, just because of their lack of scoring in general. And now with Jonathan Isaac also going to be out the next 2 months, and who knows how he makes it back this year. And while Isaac wasn't an elite scorer, he was more of a defender for them as well too. I think that's a team that just is consistently looking for guys to be able to score for them. I could see him maybe as a fit even in OKC as well too. Reuniting Chris Paul for as long as he's going to be there.
I was going to say that as well. I like him more in OKC than I probably would in Orlando, but I could clearly see where you're coming from. The Magic sorely needs, some form of scoring, consistent scoring from the bench and backcourt. Yeah.
Right. And, even again, the move has already been made, but, Utah made a move to get Jordan Clarkson about a week or so ago. So, there could have been a fit there for him as well, too, in Utah, as they're always looking for some scoring off the bench. So I don't think Crawford is done. I don't necessarily know that maybe he doesn't get on a playoff roster. I think there are a lot of teams in general who just may want to be looking at his services, and maybe he does get a look towards the latter part of the year specifically, but, his ability to just be a good teammate, hit clutch shots, he's not scared of the moment. It's a little surprising that nobody's looked him up just yet, but we'll see. And I think JR has some swag. We know China, their season ends in late February, early March, and some of these Chinese guys will maybe potentially be able to come back over here as well too. But I just don't get the NBA sometimes with it, because they just say enough. A certain dudes, and then you have guys like Waiters who are consistently getting chance after chance after chance to be on rosters. And I think if I was going to give up on somebody, he'd be somebody like, all right, get him up out of here. But say la vie.
I will say this though, Shaw. I think that maybe in this context, the NBA does a disservice to how they elevate themselves in the brand of being a globalized product. A sports product and an entertainment product, because all of these players are going overseas and they're participating for various teams. And in this day and age where everything is streaming based, it's remarkable how the NBA has not managed to find a way to still bring spotlight to these guys participating for those other franchises and other teams. I mean, I think that you would wind up elevating your fan base, specifically, and your viewership, because some of these guys do have, fans. They have people they'll go and travel wherever they'll go to, not saying they'll fly out there to go see them play in China or Taiwan or whatever, but there were people that actually enjoyed watching OJ Mayo play for the Memphis Grizzlies. There were people that actually enjoyed watching Jeremy Lin play, when he was with the Atlanta Hawks. So even if their home base of fans are in somewhere else or wherever, the fact that there hasn't been a way for the NBA to stream these guys participating and playing in other leagues. So one, you're also showcasing these guys for these other teams that might want these players back, might want to help their roster. A guy like a Tyler Hansbrough, I'm not saying, he's going to replace anyone from a starting rotation, but to not say that what he gave, teams when he was playing in the NBA, he couldn't give a couple of these teams right now. A team like the Brooklyn Nets, a team like the Utah Jazz, a tough, hard-nosed player who grinds out and gets you some hustle minutes, gets you some rebounds, give you some fouls on some bigs, bodies up on some of the bigger front court players. To not say that his name will never be mentioned because he's out playing in China and we don't know if he'll ever come back to the NBA, to me is ludicrous. And I think this is where maybe, and I know I'm taking this a little bit outside of where the context of our conversation is, but I think it does bring it full circle, because this is what does happen. These guys wind up in the dead zone because they're going to play elsewhere where they're basically wanted and are more cherished and more beloved. And the NBA misses the mark on profiling these guys in the contributions that they're making in other leagues and other countries that may very well help bring them back to the fold to at least participate one more time in the NBA.
I just don't think the NBA has the reach in essence to be able to do that with these other organizations, especially now with the relationship the way it is with China. I just don't think that's the situation from a streaming aspect to highlight former NBA guys is what they're trying to do. They prefer those guys go to the route that is under an NBA property like the G League. So if Ty Lawson, Jamal Crawford, even J.R. Smith, if they wanted to go the G League route, play for the Maine Red Claws or whoever, that would be something the NBA would be very, very excited about, because it would definitely help those G League franchises a little bit right now, especially in terms of boosting those numbers, having more known guys. But the issue is the money just isn't there for them to do the G League situation. And that's why they're going overseas, where they can make a little bit more money and potentially, hey, guys are always watching. Scouts are everywhere. So, you could have a scout from the Mavericks or from the Thunder, or the case may be, just perusing China and saying, hey, it looks like, Jeremy Lin might be ready to be able to be a contributor to somebody's roster or something like that too. So I don't think the NBA not having a vested interest in that is something that we need to focus on too heavily. But in general, just the fact that the system itself is what has kind of eluded these guys from being able to return to the league, because they make too much money as they become older veterans, and teams would rather just go the two-way route and figure out ways to get guys that they can continue to develop, as opposed to some guys who might be fringe roster players, especially if you don't feel like they're going to be a great person within the locker room and help guys develop and things of that nature. With the exception of Jamal Crawford here, I don't know any of those guys that you look at as immense leaders and guys who can really help and develop other guys. I think all the other guys that we mentioned are kind of players that look out for themselves in some ways, or just haven't been able to really catch on in a way. Like you would even talk about Brennan Jennings and Nick Stauskas and things of that nature. Guys who are also out of the league as a result of, kind of them just not being enough or good enough to make NBA rosters.
All right, Shaw, before we end off on this segment, my last question for you is, with all of the names that's been presented here, and I'll run through them again one more time. Jamal Crawford, J.R. Smith, O.J. Mayo, who's in Taiwan, Ty Lawson in China, Jeremy Lin in China, Lance Stevenson in China, Tyler Hansborough in China, Greg Monroe playing in Germany, Nick Stauskas in Spain, Brandon Jennings playing in Russia. Of these guys, give me a percentage. I just want you to give me a percentage that one of these guys are going to get picked up possibly by an NBA team. And if there is that one, who do you think the likelihood will be?
I'm gonna have to cheat. I think three guys make it back. I think Crawford will find his way back at some point.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I think Crawford's going to find a roster. Like too many people are campaigning for him. I think Lin is going to catch on as well too. Just as a guy who he does kind of get it, and I think he would be willing to take whatever role a team was willing to give him. And I for whatever reason, call me crazy, I just don't think we've seen the end of Lance Stevenson. I think he's going to find a way back to somebody's roster just for the entertainment value alone.
One may make it back to participating in the NBA, and then we'll have to throw our hands up come the 2020 off season to see where these guys might land, which teams may actually allow them, give them practice, for them to be able to kind of showcase their talents through practicing, private practices or whatever the case may be. But it's tough, man. It really is. But it's remarkable how you were able to attain as many of these players, and it's how quickly they've slipped our minds that they are no longer participating right now in the NBA as we currently speak. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was The Drop.
Coast to coast.
Time to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. Ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. Trade talks heating up. Andre Drummond in the midst of them. I think it was just recently they were saying that he might wind up going to the Atlanta Hawks. I was like, damn, ATL trying to throw it down like that from Mr. Drummond. Okay.
Yeah, man. We earlier in the year we had I think around Thanksgiving they started talking about maybe Charlotte. And I'm not quite sure, but clearly Drummond with his free agency looming, he's going to opt out of his 1 year remaining next year. Detroit realizes they're not going anywhere, and just making me Stradamus over here. I told you it was going to happen, so I'm rooting for Drummond to get up out of Detroit and hopefully the Pistons start some sort of rebuild sooner than later.
Houston or Atlanta? I'm sorry, not Houston, but Charlotte or Atlanta. Where would you like to see him go to if it was those two teams?
Actually, I think it would be Charlotte because I think Atlanta can find, maybe some other fits out there. I think they're gonna have a lot of interest in Brandon Ingram, coming off for the summer as well too. While obviously not the same position, I think Atlanta wants to maybe go with a little bit splashier pick than Drummond. So I think Charlotte probably pulls it out. But the rumor right now is Atlanta, so we'll see how it happens.
All right, out in Cleveland, a lot of talks about Kevin Love's frustration still being a Cavalier and the situation that's going on with there. When will the Love be freed?
Yeah, I think this is something that definitely gets done within the next maybe 2 to 3 weeks. Maybe after that January 15th date hits, with the next round of guys signed over the summer can be moved as well too. I don't think this is something that waits all the way till the deadline, February 6th or 7th, whenever. I think this is something that we're going to see happen before the end of January.
All right, out in Brooklyn, Kyrie Irving clearly on the mend right now, and he's spoken recently about the frustrations of his injuries, which is nothing new because, he's been injured before and he's spoken on the frustrations of his injuries before. So,
well, it's been 5 weeks or something like that since we heard from Kyrie. So, it was good to hear kind of where he's at. I think the biggest thing that you're concerned about is that he's still kind of nowhere near back, had a cortisone shot within his shoulder. So it's going to see if that works and how that takes. If not, he may end up having surgery, which could potentially end his season. So, shout out to Kyrie. Hope he gets back soon. Brooklyn is definitely slipping right now after, holding down the ship for a little while. They just got Karis LeVert back, but they definitely missed their man, Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, but Spencer Dinwiddie isn't missing him at all. Out in Los Angeles, Darren Collinson, he is considering a return back to the league after he had retired. And now the conversations are he may go Laker or he may go Clipper. Wow, that's a pretty nice way for you to weigh your options if you do want to come back to the league, I guess.
It must be nice to live in the land of the glitz and glamorous because now people just want to go there. As we alluded to a little bit earlier on the show, I think Haas would be an immense fit in a place like Philly where he could really help. While he may want to go to the Lakers, where the minute's going to come with Rondo, Bradley, and KCP and things of that nature. It's just I think it's a convoluted mess there. He might have a better path maybe as a Clipper behind Pat Bev. But overall, just the fact that he's willing to come back after, 4 months or, being retired and becoming a Jehovah's Witness, I think it's very interesting. And the NBA is definitely calling him back home.
All right, the NBA All-Star voting first results have come in. Trae Young, Luka Doncic rolling as the top vote getters right now, man. Does it surprise you?
Yeah, in a way it does, just to see that these European guys or overseas guys are captivating the league with the first results. LeBron is not the leading vote getter. Obviously, he would be a starter and he's right up there.
Not even Giannis.
With Doncic and Giannis, yeah, it's just it's wild, and it's great. You can't fault that for happening. Something that we'll have to watch as the course of the season unfolds here is that we could have Chicago looking extremely different, where you have maybe 8 to 9 first-time All-Stars, legitimately. So that's a conversation we'll get into as the voting continues to unfold here a little bit. But it's great to see that fans are doing the right thing, except with things like Taco Fall and players like that, a little higher than they should be in the voting in general.
Listen, I've said this as well numerous times that there needs to be a all-star vote getting and fans choice vote getting. Listen, we do that in music, we do that in movies. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that, as far as in sports as well too. There are just certain players that you gravitate to that while they are not elite players, they have an impact on the game, they have an impact on the culture, and I think that they should be awarded for being those type of players as well too. So while Taco Fall is not in the starting rotation for the Boston Celtics, if he is a fan favorite amongst a lot of people and he does bring something good to the game of basketball, he should be acknowledged for that, and maybe during the NBA All-Star Weekend is the perfect time for them to be able to do it. But under no circumstances should it absolve or absorb players who are deserving to be in the conversation of being All-Star players. Awesome show, Shaw, as always, man. Good stuff all around. And obviously we wanted to take a few minutes for us to reserve time and opportunity to express our condolences in the loss of really one of the pillars for the NBA. The reason why the NBA is where it is right now, it's given us, the ability to talk about it the way that it does, is because of David Stern, former NBA commissioner, who we've lost over the holiday weekend. Over the holidays. And it's an impacted loss without question. Listen, say what you want to say about this man. I know a lot of people didn't like him. I know a lot of people certainly, wasn't fond of him and the choices that he made at certain points. But if you love the game at certain capacities, at certain points, if you appreciate certain players that we've appreciated through the course of our time watching and covering the NBA, it would not be possible without David Stern. And I just think that it's just such a terrible loss, especially for someone as young as he is, in the sense that he has so much more I think he could have given not having to be the NBA commissioner. At any capacity, you lose someone who has had such an enormous impact, not just on the game in the United States, but globally, as David Sternshaw. And it's a big, big blow and a lot of shoes that need to be filled. And it's not just filled, at the hands of Adam Silver. It's all of the players who continue to come back and commit to helping grow the NBA. It's because of what David Stern had done, what he started, and ultimately what he hopes everyone else will continue to help finish his legacy and dreams with.
Extremely well said. Stern is a guy who was able to get the roses while, and still smell them while he was alive. As you alluded to, was very stern, as his namesake, if you will. But everyone recognized the businessman, the entrepreneur, and just the vision that he had to grow the game globally. I was listening to a couple of different things too, and just even his influence in putting the guys' names on the back of jerseys and selling the players and promoting black athletes, in a predominantly black league in a time that was not something that was, a lot of leagues were willing to do. He definitely saw the forthright in that. Also his involvement in even helping to get the dream team formed together. Don't think people realize how that even helped to globalize the game as much as it was. Those stars didn't know how big they were till they got over to Barcelona that year. And then having that interest in the NBA in that way sparked a new wave of players overseas as well too, just having access and being able to see the dream team on that type of schedule. So shout out to obviously Colangelo and guys like that too, but Stern had to bless that to make that happen. And just so many of the great business opportunities he's created for the league and players around the NBA over the course of the years. And LeBron James, I think, said it best, where he feels like something needs to be named after Mr. Stern in some aspect, whether it's an award, whether it's, a day, maybe the first day of NBA season is David Stern Day or something to that effect. This is a guy who we cannot forget and will not forget, for the legacy he's created within the NBA.
Not just within the NBA, Shaw, but also throughout all of sports. Once again, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week. And again, our sincere thoughts and condolences to the Stern family. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.
Okay, family, announcement. Our smart home is online.
Cool, Dad.
Yeah, smart lights, smart fridge, smart thermostat. The smart speaker plays music or answers questions. Like this. Check it out. Question: what animals besides humans have chins?
Can't find home internet.
Super impressive, Dad.
Okay, hold on. Question: can you find the home internet?
Can't find home internet.
Haha, smart house!
Your home is only as smart as your internet. Get fast, reliable internet with AT&T Fiber with speeds of 300 megabits per second, even during peak times. Find out how to bundle with AT&T TV for $89.99 a month for a year with 24-month TV and 12-month internet agreements. Limited availability may not be in your area. See if you qualify at att.com/bundle. Reliability based on network availability. Consistency based on wired connection to gateway. $10 per month internet equipment fee applies. Limit 3 concurrent AT&T streams. Details at att.com/att-tv. Speed not guaranteed and vary. Activation, early termination, internet equipment non-return, and other charges and restrictions apply. Visit att.com/bundle for details.
Hey there, Galaxy fans. Switch to Sprint and get both an unlimited plan and the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus included for just $35 per month per line for 5 lines. All you need is approved credit and an 18-month lease. No trade-in required. Visit a Sprint store, sprint.com, or call 800-SPRINT-1. S10 Plus 128 gigabytes after $26.67 per month credit. Apply within 2 bills. If canceled early, remaining balance due. Unlimited basic after $131.21. Pay $32 per month per line without auto pay. Coverage and offer not available everywhere. Excludes taxes, fees, and roaming. Speed maximums use rules. $30 activation fee and restrictions apply.